sense gratification, and liberation are known as the four goals of life. Before love of Godhead, the fifth and highest goal, these appear as insignificant as straw in the street. So, but while chanting the holy name of the Lord, one should not desire the material advancements represented by religiosity, economic development, sense gratification, ultimately liberation from the material world. As stated by Caitanya Mahaprabhu, the highest perfection in life is to develop one's love for Krishna. When we compare love of Godhead with religiosity, economic development, sense gratification, and liberation, we can understand that these achievements may be desirable objectives for mumukshus, or those who desire to enjoy the material world, and mumukshus, for those who desire liberation from it. But they're very insignificant in the eyes of a pure devotee who has developed the preliminary stage of love of Godhead. Karma and moksha are the four principles of religion that pertain to the material world. Therefore, in the beginning of Srimad Bhagavatam was declared dharma, projita Caritamrta, cheating religious systems in terms of these four material principles are completely discarded from Srimad Bhagavatam. Srimad Bhagavatam teaches only how to develop one's dormant love of God. The Bhagavad Gita is a preliminary study of Srimad Bhagavatam, and therefore it ends with the words Savadam Paritaja Mamekam Sharanam Raja. Demand all varieties of religion and just surrender unto me. To adopt, this means one should reject all ideas of religiosity, economic development, sense gratification, and liberation, and fully engage in the service of the Lord, which is transcendental to these four principles. Love of Godhead is the original function of the spirit soul, and it is as eternal as the soul and the supreme personality of God. This term is called Sana. When a devotee revives his loving service with the supreme personality of God, it should be understood that he has been successful in achieving the desired goal of his life. At that time, everything is automatically done by the mercy of the holy name, and the automatically advances in spiritual progress. Translation: religiosity, economic development, sense gratification, liberation are known as the four goals of life. Before love of Godhead, the fifth and highest goal, these appear as insignificant and straw in the street. So this Jari Purushartha is mentioned here as being simply like grass. And Purushartha, of course, refers to these goals, human goals, we can say Purushartha, which are basically the goals of the Varnashram system. So the Varnas and Ashramas, particularly the Varnas, are there for Artha. You work so you can get your food or whatever. And Kama, you do certain activities to fulfill your desires, avoid sinful activities, do punyas and sacrifices, etc., worship devatas, and Kama, fulfill your desires. And then, for those who are qualified, that is, mainly Brahmanas, then they study Vedanta and they go for moksha, liberation, that part of the Vedas. So, in this way we have four goals of human life, three of which are the Dharma, of course, is in one sense a means as well as a goal. The Dharma is the means to get your heart and your kama fulfilled. And for some people it becomes the goal itself. They don't care so much about the artha or the kama, they want to do the dharma attached to that. So, in any case, we have these four purusharthas, or goals, which are inherent in the Varnashram system. And here, Lord Chaitanya says, oh, these are like grass, insignificant. So the goal of Varnashram is quite different from the goal of bhakti and from chanting the holy name. That's the whole idea. So for that reason, we find that Lord Chaitanya often rejects the Varnashram system as external. This has to do with the material body and getting out of the material body. Even moksha is external in one sense, because it's based upon the fact that we identify with the material body, so therefore it rejects that. So the fifth goal, therefore, is the real goal of Krishna Vishayak Prema. Prema, direct towards Krishna. Parama Purushartha. That's the highest human goal. So that's the fifth goal. Of course, it could be prema for any other form, bona fide form of the Lord also. But as Bhagavatam has stated, the worship of Krishna is the recommended process for the people of Kali Yuga. And by doing so, we get a higher experience than from any other form of the Lord. So therefore, ultimately, Krishna prema is the real goal for the people of Kali Yuga. And of course, it's the Parama Purushartha, higher than other types of prema. So, this is achieved through the process of bhakti in general, but in this context, we find it has to do with chanting the holy name. Because Lord Chaitanya has here talked about how he began under the order of a spiritual master to chant the holy name, Hare Krishna Mahamantra. And then he went mad. He lost all interest in the material world. He was dancing and fainting and having ecstatic symptoms, etc. Wasn't aware of the material world at all, and that type of material knowledge. The point is that the chanting of the holy name leads to vow, which was mentioned in the previous verse, Krishna Upajaya Bhava. Vow for Krishna appears by chanting this Mahamantra. So the whole processes of bhakti will lead in this direction. Emphasis is here given to the chanting of the holy name. One, because it is Yuga Dharma. And Harinam Harinam Kevam, only the chanting of the holy name is valid in Kali Yuga, which means it's the main process within bhakti. So this does not mean that bhakti is absent in other ages. Definitely bhakti is in all ages. So whether it is Treta Yuga, or Satya Yuga, or Dwapara Yuga, or Kali Yuga, all these processes are actually directed to the Supreme Lord, whether it's meditation, homa, or archana. So it's all bhakti in one sense. So all ages have the process of bhakti. And they also have a system of varnashrama, which develops after Satya Yuga into 4 varnas, etc. And that goes on simultaneously. In any case, in all the ages, the emphasis is upon bhakti. But in Kali Yuga, the bhakti takes the form of non-sankirtan, whereas in other ages it is archana or homa or meditation jnana. So the holy name, therefore, is powerful enough to deliver that prema. And it can deliver prema to all the people. Now, in the previous ages also, meditation, homa, and deity worship, they all delivered prema, the same goal. Bhakti has the same goal. And it was the Yuga Dharma also, so for all the people. In Kali Yuga, the Yuga Dharma is chanting the holy name, and that delivers the prema. What is the difference? The difference is that in Kali Yuga, the people are the least qualified. So the less qualified than the people of Dwapara Yuga, Treta Yuga, or Satya Yuga. But still, they can attain the goal. So, this indicates that the chanting of the name has the power to deliver less qualified people. The other processes have more qualified people that it delivers. Everyone's more qualified, that delivers everybody. In Kali Yuga, everybody is less qualified. So we need a Yuga Dharma, which leads to the same goal, but which can pick up the unqualified or less qualified people, the least qualified people. So this is what the holy name does. However, the Yuga Dharma is present 1,000 times in Kali Yuga, 1,000 Kali Yugas. And the Kali Yuga avatar comes a black color, and he propagates non-sankirtan. This particular time when Lord Chaitanya appeared and when Krishna appeared is different. And the difference is that Krishna appeared in the Dwapara Yuga and Lord Chaitanya appears in the Kali Yuga. And both are not the same as the other Yuga avatars. The Krishna who appears is Swayam Bhagavan Krishna. And his purpose is not simply Yuga Dharma. So though he functions like a Yuga Dharma avatar, though we can label him such, actually he has a much different purpose. So what was Krishna's purpose? Of course he does kill demons, he establishes Dharma and Yuga Dharma and whatever. That's all the purpose. But his real purpose is to reveal this highest aspect of Swayam Bhagavan Krishna, his pastimes, his qualities, etc. His rasa. To the people of the material world, which just wants to live from. So this is real purpose. And Lord Chaitanya comes in Kali Yuga. Of course, he also comes to propagate Yuga Dharma, etc. But his purpose is to let the people of Kali Yuga achieve Krishna. So therefore, the Yuga Dharma is not something else on Kirtan, but it is Krishna's name. Now, the highest aspect of Krishna is Radha and Krishna and Madhurya Rasa. And Lord Chaitanya's special mission is that, to deliver Madhurya Rasa, not just Krishna, but Madhurya Rasa of Radha and Krishna to the people of Kali Yuga. So this is explained at the beginning of Caitanya Caritamrta, where he gives these different verses to show how Lord Chaitanya gives what was not given for a long time. And that is this high prema, this very, very exalted prema of Radha. So he reveals this to the material world, even though the people are the most fallen. So all of this is achieved through the name. However, it is not simply the name, it is the name as delivered by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He is the functioning as the Yuga avatar, etc. But his special purpose is to actually distribute this Radha Krishna prema to everybody. And he can do so because he is not different from Krishna. He is Krishna. And simultaneously, he is Radha. So he can deliver Radha Krishna prema to the people of Kali Yuga. Now, of course, Radha is merciful and she likes to engage everyone in devotional service. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has that bhava of Radha, and Lord Chaitanya wants to give this prema to all the fallen souls of Kali Yuga, all the unqualified people of Kali Yuga. So it is done through chanting the Mahamantra, Hare Krishna. So this is how Radha Krishna is delivered to the people of Kali Yuga. So therefore, when this is present, of course, prema itself is superior to liberation and the other Purushottas, even if it is prema for Vishnu or Rama or whoever. Okay? And of course, it's explained in Nectar Devotion there that if one reaches Bhava stage, then moksha becomes insignificant, useless, because by attaining Bhava, one has automatically achieved liberation, destruction of ahankara, karma, etc. But additionally, one realizes this more, that is more significant because one develops bliss in serving that Supreme Lord directly. That bliss makes the bliss of liberation useless. What to speak of the bliss from material things and artha, dharma, and kama. And this will happen for the worship of any form of a bona fide form of the Lord. One can get there. So, because Krishna is the highest form, and Radha Krishna is the highest form of Krishna, that delivers the highest bliss also. So that's even more remarkable as the Purushartha for the people of Kali Yuga. So therefore, all these Purusharthas become much more like trash, insignificant, because of the high, exalted bliss of Radha Krishna prema. So therefore, more than normally, as we get a realization of Radha Krishna, then these Purusharthas become much more insignificant than ever. And all of this is achieved through chanting the holy name. Very, very simple process that everyone can take part in. So as I mentioned, it is available for everybody and it has effect on everybody. And Lord Chaitanya, of course, admitted even the aparatis, they must also get mercy. So everybody could get some effect from the name, from hearing it or chanting it or whatever. However, if we want to get that prema, then there is some qualification for that. That's all. So to get this karma purushartha, Krishna prema, then there is some qualification there. So after one goes through the stage of accidental chanting or namabhasana, one should come to the stage of pure chanting. Which means that we do have to have association and mercy of devotees, by which we can get proper scriptural knowledge of pure chanting and pure bhakti. And we can avoid aparads and material desires, desire for liberation, etc. So, this is the general qualification. Now, there are exceptions to the rule. Just as with Krishna, he won't deliver the aparati and they go to the spiritual world, like Adasura or Utana, whatever. That's there also. Lord can do anything he wants to. So even without coming to the stage of pure chanting or whatever, even the aparati, not even going to Namavas, can go to the spiritual world if the Lord so chooses. But the general process is you follow the process of coming from Namavas to pure name. And pure name is sadhana. Pure name does not mean prema. It means a sadhana to get to Bhava and prema. Sudhananda, or Sudha Bhakti. We do pure bhakti or Uttama Bhakti as sadhana to get to Bhava and to get to prema. So similarly, Sudhana means we chant in order to get to Bhava and prema as a sadhana. So we're not absolutely pure. Jiva Goswami gives an explanation why we can call this pure bhakti or pure name, even though we're not pure really. Because sadhana implies that we're practicing to get to bhava and prema. Even bhava's not pure, absolutely. What to speak of sadhana? So sadhana means we are impure by nature. Otherwise, we don't have to say. If we haven't been pure already, we have prema. No more sadhana. So we're doing something to get to prema. That means we're impure. We have not completely developed that attraction, and we do have anattas. So, how is it possible? Why can we call it pure bhakti? If it is not actually pure in the sense that we still have anarthas, etc., and it's not strong enough. But the answer is this: yes, it is true. So he gives an example of a sacrifice, homa. Of course, homa has different rules and regulations to follow. The essence of the homa is to offer the fire, the grains into the fire with mantra, or ghee into the fire with mantra. So that's the homa. However, we do have some preliminary rituals or actions that we do. Before we offer the ghee and the grains into the fire. Okay. So if you'll observe a sacrifice done by a priest, then they will carry out certain purificatory rites. They will sprinkle the pit. Of course, they have to make the pit first. Right in the proper way, and clean the whole place. And then they sprinkle some water, and they do chanting mantras around the fire pit, etc. like that. They light the fire, they purify the spoons, they purify the ghee, they do various steps, and they worship the fire, etc. And it goes through various steps. Then after doing all of this, then they begin to offer the grains and the ghee into the fire, which is the actual homa. So we call these preliminary rites homa also. Even though technically it's not homa, because the homa is the offering of the ghee into the fire. But all these rituals leading up to that, they're included in the homa itself. They also call homa. So though Sutta Bhakti in its most absolute sense is prema, we include everything leading up to that as Sutta Bhakti also. But because it is only through that process that we get to prema. If we do mixed bhakti, other types of bhakti, then we don't get that prema. Just as by doing those rituals of purification, we become qualified to do the homa. So therefore they're linked to, we can't separate the two things. And we call it all homa. So we call the whole process Sutta Bhakti. Because one leads to the other, and without that we can't get to the absolutely Sutta Bhakti. Absolutely pure Bhakti. So in this way, it is called Sutta Bhakti in the beginning because it leads to that framework. And if we don't do that process, it doesn't lead to that. So very, very necessary to follow that process of Sutta Bhakti. So we are not pure in doing that sadhana, but what is the purity? The purity is, one, the knowledge that we have of the position of the Supreme Lord. So we do not confuse Bhagavan with Devatas and ordinary jivas. We distinguish the Supreme Lord from the jivas. And if we want to be more special, we'll distinguish Swami Bhagavan Krishna from other forms of the Lord. That's, of course, Bhagavatam. The more special knowledge. Knowledge, clear knowledge of the object of worship and the position that object of worship is necessary. And, of course, knowledge of the pure process, that is, without other desires, without desire for enjoyment, without desire for liberation or anything else. So, of course, as I said, we are not pure in one sense, because we still have ahankara and some karmas and desires and anger and so many other things in us afflicting us. But in the execution of bhakti, we do not deliberately ask for material things or liberation. So, of course, this is maybe natural in one sense. Once we begin reading the scriptures, etc., or if we just read something like Bhagavad Gita or the introduction to Bhagavad Gita, we kind of understand that immediately, that the goal is not material benefits or liberation, etc. However, for other people who are practicing something which we call religion or dharma or whatever in India, there is no real clear distinction. They don't know what they want. So naturally they will pray for material things, basically. They don't even pray for liberation. So everybody prays for material things. And I think that's religion. That's what God does. So they carry that over to bhakti. Okay, we're performing bhakti. Yes, we're worshiping only Krishna. We don't worship Devata, but we're still praying for material things. It's just the nature of people to do so. So to come to the stage of understanding that worship means only to try to please Krishna without desiring things for yourself. It's quite an elevated stage. But that is the beginning of pure bhakti. When we get that understanding, we start practicing. Even though we're not pure. We're only going through Anartha, Vritti, Nishta, and Lucha, Sakti. Wow, still. That understanding is very important for us. So these are the functions of Sadhu Sangha and Guru, to give the Sambandha Jnana and the Avidya and the understanding of the Prayojana. These things are the subjects of scripture. They are delivered by the devotees and Guru, Shri Guru. So, very, very essential. So therefore, along with the chanting of the holy name, even though it is independent of Diksha as such, it's not dependent on taking initiation, everyone can chant, we do have to get guidance of devotees to get the proper knowledge. And then we get this perfection of Paramati and Sharpa, that is Krishna Jnana. So, in this way, the chanting of the holy name is the ultimate process. Generally, though it says Caitanya Caritamrta, only the holy name, generally, we have to do the other processes. So we do have Sadhu Sangha, we have deity worship, we have Shravana, so many other processes we do follow as as part of bhakti essential. Because without getting the knowledge from Shravana, then we cannot practice pure bhakti. So very simple, but the main process is chanting the holy name. That's the main sadhana. So everything else helps attain that purity so we can attain that Krishna friendship. So we have chanting the holy name assisted by the other processes of bhakti. Then what about the other processes, jnana, yoga, karma, etc.? They can also be assistance as such, but they are much less assistance. Why? Because in themselves they do not produce bhakti. Shravanam and smananam and deity worship in themselves produce bhakti in the jiva, more and more attraction for the Lord. And you can attain prema by any of these processes. By doing varnashram rules and regulations, you do not get that. By doing jnana, you do not. By doing yoga, it does not happen. So it does not produce prema, does not produce bhakti as such. Maybe indirectly it can produce bhakti in the sense that varnashram includes in some worship of the Lord. No? But it's all very indirect. So there's a difference, and we should understand that clear difference between the actions of karma, jnana, and yoga and the actions of bhakti. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur calls these, the varnashrama rules as gona vidi, secondary rules. And the mukhya vidi, or the primary rules, are all the processes of bhakti. In that we get the primary ones, Nam Sankirtan. So then the most essential is Nam Sankirtan, then along with that, we have the mukhya vidi of the other processes of bhakti. Then we can do the other processes as gona vidi. Why do we need the gona vidi? In one sense, of course, Nam is independent, and the bhakti process is independent of the varnashram system, and again, is independent. But we have material bodies, and we have to maintain the material body. So generally in India, to maintain the material body, they work within the varnashram system. They define their work according to varna, and then it goes to the ashramas if they're upper varna. So they would make use of that also, because they have a material body, and they're living in a material body. But the success of bhakti and the success of chanting does not depend on that. So if you were a Chandala outside India, and there's no varnashram system, you can still do bhakti, you can still chant the holy name, and you can still get the perfection. Either way. But it's a convenience to follow that process of varnashram rules and regulations, as long as it does not contradict the principles of bhakti. So those elements that do contradict or seem to contradict, like worshiping Devatas and Pitras and the Yajnas for Svargaloka, etc., that is all rejected. The contradictory elements are not allowed. And those elements which are favorable for supporting the material body, so we can do bhakti, acceptable. Those elements to support the body, those rules for cleanliness, rules for social interaction, because we're living in a society. If you're living in a society and they're following varnashram, then you follow the rules of varnashram also. Don't create disturbance in society. Rules for family, samskaras, etc., all taken from this varnashram rules and regulations. So we don't have in bhakti itself rules for that, how to raise a family. It's not only so bhakti, hearing and chanting, raise your family with hearing and chanting. A little bit of practical. So we need some rules on how to raise family, etc., and all this. So the rules are taken from varnashram system. So concerning the body and the family and the society, etc., the varnashram rules. So if we start developing material desires through that, it becomes unfavorable as well. And if we think that if we don't follow these rules and regulations of varnashram, then we are faulty in our bhakti. That is also not good. It's an obstacle. So we have to have the proper understanding and execution of these other rules and regulations along with the process of bhakti. So as long as they do not involve attachment in themselves with those goals of material development, then varnashram is okay. And then one could even mix rules of jnana with bhakti. And examples are given in different parts of the Bhagavatam. Some example where you can mix it, as long as you don't get that goal of liberation mixed into your goal of prema. Okay? So for instance, living in a solitary place, mona vrata, something like that. We don't want to speak to materialists, etc. We want to separate ourselves from people. This is part of the jnana process. Controlling the senses, controlling the mind, vairagya, living a very simple life, etc. It's part of the jnana process. To a certain extent, they can be favorable for some people, practicing bhakti. So they can be appropriate, as long as one does not become too attached to those things in themselves. And they help the development of the bhakti and chanting. So we should never lose sight of the actual process. That process is bhakti, and within bhakti, chanting the holy name. That's the main thing. Other things that we don't secular to support that whole thing. And that way we can get to the karma purushottam that is the main.
Let's see. The goal of bhakti is to keep prema, correct? But see, you mentioned that in other Hindus also, in the form of meditation, whatever they said, there is a part of bhakti. But you see that verse is mentioned, Shri Caitanya Mahaprabhu Matam Idam Prama Purmattamana, and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu reveals prema. That whatever is there, the goal of bhakti is then different than the prema in other Hindus.
Well, bhakti is always present, and then the goal of bhakti must always be present as well. But in our Kali Yuga, the prema is a little different. That is Krishna prema, Radha Krishna prema. So that which makes it special. It's special prema.
So only these Kali Yuga people get this Radha Krishna prema.
Yeah.
They don't get it.
And also
Krishna prema.
and also Madhurya.
Which is basically Dasya, Ishvarya, etc. That's a much lower category.
It's not difficult to understand that the people of different yugas, the qualified, they are not getting Radha Krishna. Unqualified people are getting Radha
Well,
Krishna.
that's the remarkable thing about Lord Chaitanya.
What happened to them? They have to come again in Kaliyuga and be born again.
Yeah. Once a day, 28th cycle and Vaidasottamantara. Kali Yuga.
Maharaj, you see this Vairagya is not a part of the bhakti. Vairagya means renunciation is not a part of the bhakti.
Yeah.
But see, there is a verse in Chaitanya we say that, Mahaprabhu Bhakta Vairagya Pradhan Dahadi Guru Bhagavan is mentioned. Vairagya Pradhan means they also renounce. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is very pleased by seeing the renounce. But it's not a part of the bhakti. But I think Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is very pleased with this Vairagya.
Yeah, if it is the result of one's attachment to Krishna. So that's how Lord Chaitanya defines sannyas. Sannyas is the renunciation of everything for attachment to Krishna. Give everything to Krishna. And renounce for the self. So, naturally, we see that the Goswamis, the exalted Vaishnavas, are very detached. That's a good quality. But it's not in itself, detachment is also there in the Jnanis and the Yogis. They're also detached. But they don't have attachment to Krishna. So the detachment of the devotees is a result of their attachment to Krishna. Okay? They don't practice detachment. Simply because they're absorbed in Krishna. They ignore the body, they ignore the material world. Okay? So in other words, that detachment is simply a sign of one's great attachment to the Lord and things like that. So in that sense, it's a good quality because it indicates in a negative way the positive aspect of absorption in the Supreme Lord. And if we do have material attachments and they're visible, that means we have less attachment to the Lord, obviously.
It cannot be together.
So therefore, but then if we have great detachment, no attachment at all, also useless. Organic yogi instead.
Doubt here. Is it possible to attain prema by only chanting 16 rounds, by following the Guru's instruction by preaching or other services? Will the revelation happen in the minimum of 16 rounds chanting itself if done sincerely and attending ISKCON daily programs and activities?
Well, there is no set rule on how much you have to chant or whatever. The main thing is the development of the devotion through the process, whether it is chanted once or many times. In general, we try to chant more, not just once. So Lord Chaitanya said, one who chants the name constantly, he's a better Vaishnava. One who chants once, he's a okay Vaishnava. One who chants constantly, he's a better Vaishnava. So, therefore, as much as possible, we should chant. But there's no set rule whether it's 16 rounds or 64 rounds or 144 rounds or whatever. There's no set rule that any of these numbers are going to guarantee prema or not guarantee prema. It is actually the purity and the determination and motivation of the particular devotee which will please Krishna as well. Then he can attend.
What is the meaning of Caitanya Caritamrta? Mahaprabhu says, chant constantly.
Yeah, Kirtaniya Siddhahari, we can chant the holy name constantly if we are free from these various things like desire for respect, etc., or unwilling play, aggression, tolerance, etc. So, in one sense, he's given some qualification by which the chanting becomes effective. And if it becomes effective, we develop taste. If we develop taste, then naturally we chant all the time. We don't do other things.
If you take this verse of Srimad Bhagavad Gita, like in the Satatam Kirtyantamam Yatantashaha means with determination, with love, someone chant this holy name. You say that, you can get also. That's why it's mentioned Satatam, it's always, constantly. So there is a Yatantashaha means that determination that I have to get, I have to please the Krishna.
Yeah.
If someone chants with this determination, then I think it's not so difficult to get a prema.
Yeah, of course the qualification is greed, so not.
Yeah.
One has to have a lobha for attaining Krishna and serving Krishna, then one gets it. If one has a rather indifferent attitude towards the Supreme Lord, how are you going to develop? Okay, nice to attain Krishna, but we have eagerness, obviously. It's a higher qualification, and it helps us in our sadhana, etc. And then we get better results. So the utsahandishjaya the favorable attitude of what enthusiasm, determination, and patience, etc. The favorable things to help us develop towards prema. Of course, as I said, there's no set rule. And the Lord at any time may help the devotee in special ways, and therefore even the aparadis, like Putanigate, without any effort at all, without any determination. Like aparadis, they also go to the spiritual world, get prema or whatever, but the normal case is that we have to put in some determined effort. And through that effort, then the Lord becomes pleased, then He helps us.
If you say no rules, means Satatam itself is a rule.
Yeah?
Satatam itself is a rule. That
Well,
always.
in what sense no rule? Because Putana no rule, she didn't do anything, and Agasur didn't do anything, and Mrigari the hunter didn't do anything like that. They didn't put much effort into it, and they got very great results with little effort. So those are exceptional cases, of course. Okay? No absolute rule, but in general, we follow the process of sadhana, and it means we get sadhana siddhi through practice, and the practice means time and effort. Necessary sadhana means effort.